On February 24th of 2022, the world watched in shock and horror as Russia's deadly invasion of Ukraine commenced. Since then, and at the time of this recording, over 5,000 innocent Ukrainian civilian lives were lost, and 12 million more have been displaced or are seeking refuge from the terror. As February melted into March and the world still watched as civilians trapped in war zone slowly ran out of food, watched as desperate and displaced women were preyed upon by traffickers, and as Ukrainian families painstakingly searched for their loved ones. It's true, the whole world watched. But what else could we do? In the chaos of war or natural disaster, much of the world is left disconnected from the crisis, unsure of what is needed or how we can help. Hello, I am your host, Mike Lake, and in today's preview, I will be talking with Tony Tan, founder of Gabera, a mobile application developed in the wake of the Ukrainian refugee crisis to provide visibility, transportation, and immediate relief to Ukrainian refugees and anyone else suffering in any form of global crisis.
Innovation, resiliency, discovery. Join Mike Lake, President and CEO of Leading Cities, as we explore the technologies shaping the possibilities of our future with a preview of tomorrow.
Hello and welcome, Tony. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Preview of Tomorrow. And of course, as always, I want to thank our guests who are tuning in. Whether they are listening or viewing this episode, we're grateful to have you here with us. And now, I'm really excited to introduce you to Tony Tan. He is the founder of Gabera, a company matching calls for help with immediate humanitarian aid to provide visibility and a voice to those suffering in global crises. Tony, tell us, what inspired you to create Gabera?
Well, first, Mike, thanks so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. What happened was that on the 24th of February this year, like the rest of the world, I witnessed the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. And with that, we saw many people suffering. We saw families having to evacuate at the last minute, carrying with them all they could on their backpacks to a safer zone. We saw children being lost in the crowds because of the chaos. We've seen people being taken advantage of by human traffickers pretending to offer free accommodation. So much suffering was happening, and like everybody else, I just felt I had to do something. And I thought that if there was a way in which I could introduce technology into the solution to help these people get through these difficult situations, they might stand a better chance of surviving the ordeal.
You know, can you give us, I mean, like you said, we all watched the horrors and just stood by in disbelief that something like this was happening. Truth is, I can't even imagine what the people and families in Ukraine have been dealing with. But can you give us a sense of whether it's a Ukrainian refugee or in any crisis area, and I said that it's not just man-made, it's not just war conditions. Right? This is natural disasters as well. Can you give us a sense of just how difficult it might be for somebody and how challenging getting back to normalcy might be?
Well, normalcy is the last thing on their minds when they are experiencing a crisis like this. And I speak from personal experience because I've been in the humanitarian aid industry for quite a few years and had witnessed some of these natural disasters myself, as well as in armed conflict situations. What they are most on their minds is safety for themselves and for their family members. And who do you go to for help? The government and authorities are not always readily available to them in times of this nature. But the people who would be able to provide assistance are not also normally within your own country, like in the case of Ukraine, to take as an example. And it's not always easy for them to come to where the aid is required. Sometimes they are delayed because they need to raise funds for their efforts. They need to organize themselves. And some of these organizations are so large that there's a certain bureaucracy that exists within them that delays the process. And of course, there's always the politics that key decision makers are unable to take the call if these organizations should move in at a certain point in time. But who can offer the help? Well, the people within the vicinity, the people in proximity. If you take the case of Ukraine, for instance, there are about 5 million refugees now living outside the country. But we must remember that Ukraine has a population of 43 million. So where are the 38 million? They're still within the country and they can still help each other. But they need assistance because they're just average people like us. If the app can provide intelligence, provide them guidance, provide them tools to use to help each other, so many more lives can be saved.
Well, and so that's the interesting thing about this is for folks who find themselves in these devastating circumstances, there's no shortage of needs, right? Like there's just a lot of things that are necessary and immediate. But there is a lack of awareness, communication, connectivity. And by connectivity, I'm not just talking about a cell signal or Wi-Fi. I'm talking about being able to connect the person in need with the resources they're in need of. And so do you have a sense of just how damaging that can be, not having that level of connectivity in that sense?
Well, I think people face despair because who else can you go to for help? And depending on your situation, whether you are currently experiencing a state of emergency where someone is injured or hurt in your family, to someone who's just not having enough to eat to survive for the next day. So it's total despair. But if a solution could be provided to them in the most convenient way, and nowadays almost everybody has a smartphone. And you talk about connectivity. Well, fortunately, and this is with great thanks to Elon Musk, a very popular name, he made available through his technology such that Wi-Fi or internet access is still available despite all that was going on, and that allowed people to still use a smartphone at least on most of the occasions. So if we can capitalize on that technology, then people are no longer alone. They are actually having access to multitudes of people within proximity as well as outside their country who in one way or another may be able to offer the aid. And that tool provides them the opportunity to do so.
Excuse me. So that brings us right to the solution you have created. So can you explain to us, paint the picture, today is a normal day. Suddenly tomorrow you wake up and you find yourself in a crisis situation. How do you make use of this tool?
Well, this tool is like a Swiss Army knife. In fact, right now we have 11 different services that it provides or features. I'll just share a couple of them. Let's take the case of the United States, for instance, in a peaceful time. Assume that someone was about to approach a school and notice a suspicious person carrying a weapon, a gun, say, for instance, entering the school. That person could take a picture of that individual and immediately post it on the app. All the users of the app will receive a sort of like a public alarm system. They will be notified that an unusual, suspicious looking character carrying a weapon just entered the school. So those who are able to access the app will receive that alert and be cautious that, okay, is this a real danger or is it false? It can be determined by someone who is a professional, like a police officer, can investigate the situation. Another feature that we have is, say, for instance, if someone is caught in an area that is being bombed by the enemy, and he's trapped in a collapsed building but still alive. But it's so hard to find people who are trapped by the rescuers because it's all rubble for them. You know, they have to just keep on removing them. But a person with the phone will be able to geotag through the app right down to 3 square meters where he's located. And the message is then sent to the emergency context so that they can narrow down and try to save him. I also have features such as for missing persons and also for deceased individuals. You know, people who are unfortunately killed at war. There's no time to give them a proper burial. So what friends or even strangers, and this we can see on YouTube with regard to the Ukraine crisis, where they just bury them as quickly as they can. But you know, when the war is over, you want to know what happened to your family member. Well, the individual who buried that deceased person can actually geotag, and that information is stored in a secure manner where the body's location is not revealed, but is within the app, so that when the appropriate authorities come to us at Gabera to request for the information on location of the deceased, we would be able to reveal it, and then the family members can give them proper burial. So we have many of these features to help people through these crises.
And so, I mean, the reality is, without a tool like this, what's the alternative?
There isn't. There isn't an alternative that I'm aware of, or friends who have consulted on this who are aware of, that is able to provide the same kind of support for them. Right now, most people rely on the NGOs, the aid agencies, the relief organizations, and the governments. And they're doing great work, but there is a gap here. There's a time lapse, and time is not on the side of people who are suffering. They need help now.
That's exactly right. And, you know, I can tell you many years ago, about 20 years ago, I and then Senator Joe Biden, who was this chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Anthony Blinken, who's now the Secretary of State for the United States, and their team, we put together a piece of legislation that would allow the U.S. government to mobilize first responders rather than just mobilizing military, which is the largest body of people that can be mobilized on the drop of a hat. But to actually get first responders who are trained in these scenarios to get out to crisis, whether it's in the U.S. or internationally. And this was inspired by, you remember, of course, the tsunami in Indonesia. So unfortunately, that bill never made it through Congress. And so the group, the program that we had created doesn't exist today. But the whole rationale of it was addressing exactly what you're talking about, recognizing that in the moment of crisis, most of the systems that are available are slow to respond. And when you're in crisis, what you need more than anything else is a fast response.
Yes.
And so there's this disconnect. And this is what I love about what you've created. I mean, Gabera is the immediate solution, right? The immediate response. It's the way to mobilize people to help one another, to connect, to share resources, to support each other. And that's what's generally needed most.
You're absolutely right. And I'm so glad that you were considering this solution back when you were working with the leadership. But it's so necessary. Even till today, there is still no credible solution that can fill this gap that I'm aware of.
Yeah, it's a real problem, I want to. I mean, the impact that it can have is obvious. We see it, unfortunately, today in Ukraine. We can imagine it for hurricanes and tsunamis and earthquakes and all these things that unfortunately happen too often. But let's look 10, 20, 50 years out, right? And in any crisis anywhere in the world, that community is equipped with Gabera. What does that mean? What does it mean for that person? What does it mean for their community? What does it mean for the whole planet?
Well, I hope what it means to individuals, and I will focus on the individual because the community is formed by individuals.
Yeah.
And if the individual, as a result of this app, now begins to feel that it's incumbent upon him or her to help others, to help his or her neighbor, people around the community, or even further than that, that would be such a wonderful accomplishment, that people are no more caring about each other, because it's very easy to be indifferent. Out of sight, out of mind. Someone may be suffering, but he's in another part of the world. Can be so dangerous, a mentality that people adopt. But for the users who are in need of help, it gives them a huge leg up in overcoming an obstacle, in getting on in life to a better state, in saving his or her own life, just by the fact that a stranger, if you like, who is in proximity, is willing to offer a hand. I think that would be a great accomplishment for mankind.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Tony, I thank you so much for doing this work. It's so critical. It's so life-changing for people who are in that situation where they need a Gabera solution. So I'm really grateful for your commitment to solving this challenge for them, and I'm grateful for you taking the time, finding the time to join us today on Preview of Tomorrow.
The pleasure's all mine, Mike, and I'm so grateful that you have this opportunity that you can afford to people like myself to share our work, and I hope that there will be more people who would like to come on board and support the effort. Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to this episode of Preview of Tomorrow. Listeners like you are essential to advancing our efforts to drive resiliency and sustainability for all. I ask that you give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or whichever streaming platform you prefer. Your feedback helps us to grow and share these brief previews of what life in the future can be. In addition to thanking our guest today, I want to thank Peter Roy and Demetria Bridges for making this podcast possible. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and encourage others to also join us each week in previewing the possibilities of tomorrow.
Preview of Tomorrow is brought to you by Leading Cities, a global nonprofit driving resilience and sustainability for all by unleashing the potential of the world's cities. Join them at leadingcities.org.